Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at the next phase of the project management process, starting to develop our actual plan of action. All right, so by this stage we've done a scope document. We've thought about everything that's going to happen in our activity. We've thought about different resources. We've got all our stakeholders mapped out, all our SWOT, all that sort of good gear. So now we have a really good idea of what's supposed to happen and what we're trying to achieve. Okay, so once we've done that and we've got the okay to go ahead, we can start to move into the real development, the absolute detail of the plan and coming up with what's going to happen. All right, so once we're developing the plan, there's a few key things that are going to happen in there. And one of the key things that's going to happen is we need an organization or a work breakdown structure. So org or work breakdown. Okay, we'll go into a couple of these documents shortly. So I've got my work breakdown document as well. All right, so really that's talking about, well, what needs to be done. So what are the key things that are going to happen? So we'll have like a network. So what we're talking about there is a diagram that shows how everything connects. So that connects all my different activities. Okay, so I've got my work breakdown structure, who's doing what, the network, so how do those things all work together, so all those what's, how do they form the bigger picture, and also making sure I've got a timeline. Okay, now remember, starts at today and ends at X, okay? So once I've got a timeline, then what I can start to do is, as we'll go into that, I can start to put the key events on there and make sure I've got enough time to get everything done. I can add it all up and make sure that I've allocated the right amount of time. All right, cool. So I need to think about how long each one of those tasks is going to take and then put it there. All right, the next thing I need to think about is to make sure I've got a good budget. Okay, make sure I detail out my budget. So by that stage, remember we did our estimation before. This is where we start to really confirm these things, find out exactly how much things are really going to cost. Make sure we've identified a list of resources we're going to need. Okay, so is there equipment, software, hardware? Do I need money, equipment? What is it that I need? Okay, all those sort of things, which obviously leads to what and how much, as well as when. Okay, and that, if we expand that out, we also need to think about staff. So when do we need the staff? When do we need the people? Where do we need them, etc. And when the people arrive, we're talking about our people, which once again is a resource. But when we think about our people, we need to think about what are the roles and responsibilities. Okay, so what job do I want them to do? What are they accountable for? And how's that all going to work? Okay, what are the different functions they're going to carry out? All right, so that's the key thing I'm going to start to begin with. All right, so the development of my plan, my work breakdown structure, so who's doing what job, when, where, how, etc. The networking diagram, so I make sure all my activities are linked up. So whether you just present it as a sheet, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and how it goes, or depending on how complicated and how big this activity is, there might be multiple sheets and multiple maps. Okay, so my networks, to connect that together, I've got my key timeline, so I might have my project timeline, which is the big picture, so the project day 1 to day 50 or however many days it is, and each one of these things will have its own little timeline too, so I need to think about what each of these activities are and how long they're going to take, and make sure it's all mapped out against a timeline. And we'll talk about some different tools for doing that later. Things like Gantt Charts, etc. really help. Make sure that I've developed out my budget, as I say, so I know how much money I'm going to spend, and also when do I need the money by? Do I pay as we go, or am I paying everything at the end? So how soon do I need the cash? Resources, how much of what, where, when, all that sort of good gear we need to know. Time, money, people, equipment, whatever it happens to be. And the people coming on board, as I say, to make sure I've got a really clear list of what are their roles, what are their responsibilities, when do I need them, for how long do I need them, what do I need them doing, all that. All right, cool. So that's my first stage of getting into that. We'll start to break those down and get into a little bit more detail on each one of those steps. Okay, so the first thing we need to really go back to and make sure we get right is our work breakdown structure. Possibly one of the most important documents you're going to deal with because it's the one that tells everyone what they're going to be doing. Okay, so and what they're trying to achieve. If we don't have that, we've got a whole pile of resources with no work breakdown. Okay, nothing really happens. So in some ways can be Personally, I think it's one of the most important things. Other people will argue with me, and that's great. You know, opinions are fantastic. But okay, making sure we've got a good work breakdown structure is just going to make life so much easier for us regardless. Okay, so what it's really trying to address is what needs to be done. Okay, so it's the obvious document that answers, you know, what are we going to do? What needs doing? Okay, now to make sure that we got that, we need to do some planning. And the planning means that what we really need to get is our team together and have our meeting, planning with the team. And what we're trying to do is make sure that we end up with a very detailed list, you know, of tasks. Okay, so we make sure that we get all the tasks and activities involved in the project as good a picture as we can possibly get from the very beginning, all right? And we need to know what's going to go into it. Now, the way that's going to work best is to make sure that we meet with the team, okay? So it's a team-based activity to develop up our work breakdown structure. And look, you know, one of the key things there is, you know, particularly at the beginning, when you're starting to put it together, don't worry about, you know, we need to start at, you know, point 1 and go through. The first thing you need to do is just start thinking about, you know, what are the tasks? So just get a list of tasks. Okay, just start talking through. You can break it down into a logical manner and, you know, sort of say, well, here's the beginning. But just start to really quickly identify what are the key tasks. So, all right, we're going to have an event. It's going to be an outdoor event. We're going to hold it in a park. It's going to be for about 200 people. All right, so what do we need to do? We need to book the park. We need to make sure that we've, you know, notified people of the event, so we need to book some marketing. We need to think about any insurance or liability we might need. We need to think about catering. We probably need to think about toilets. We probably need to think about parking. So how are they going to get in and park? Do we need to assign someone to do that? All right, so what we're doing is we're just starting to think through what are the big items, okay? Make sure we jot all those down. And then once we're done, obviously once we've finished in the activity, we need to think about the cleanup. The things need to be cleaned up. All right, we need to have someone to book people to come and, you know, whatever it is. So we're thinking about those big pictures of how it logically needs to go. Then once we've got all those big moving parts, we can break down into the smaller parts. Okay, so to book the park, someone's going to have to call the council. Someone's going to have to do this. Someone's going to have to do that. To arrange it to be cleaned up, someone's going to have to call the cleaning company. Someone's going to have to, okay, so we go through the someone has to's, and that gives us the list. Now what should happen is when we then lay it all out, we should have a fairly good plan with a whole bunch of things that are going to happen off it. All right, and if we've got that right, we won't miss anything. So the way to get that list of tasks is probably do a brainstorm. Okay, brainstorming, once again, something people talk about a lot, get it wrong heaps as well. But we want to make sure that we're getting as much input as possible from the team. So people do the, hey, what about, what about, what about? So guide it, okay? The whole point about a brainstorm is you're guiding the activity to try and make sure everyone participates and shares their point. So go through that, you know, and as I say, just get them all on paper. You can always put them into logical order later. We need to think about what's going to happen, you know, talk it through. What about this? What about this? How long do you reckon? Okay, and once you're happy with your list, you can start to group and order. Okay, so put them into the logical order, group all the tasks of like things so you can see if you can save yourself, okay, well I've already got this person calling the council to book the park, so maybe they can also book the cleanup through the same bunch of people. And this is where once we know all the big things are and we've broken down those tasks, we can start to see is there any time saving between them, or, you know, do they have to be at certain times or a little bit different. All right, so there's a whole bunch of different activities that go into that, and we'll talk about them next. Okay, so look, there's a bunch of different activity categories that we might talk about as we go through those. We might be thinking about things like theme, you know, budget. Okay, these might start to drive it, you know, if I know, you know, what sort of thing I'm trying to do, I know roughly what sort of budget I want to set. Going out there and getting expressions of interest. Okay, that can be an activity there as well. Thinking about, you know, how we're going to make bookings and what bookings do we need to make. So, you know, if we're running an event, you know, how do people book through us? What bookings do we in turn need to make? Do we need to get a park? Do we need to get cleaners? Do we need to get caterers? You know, what is it? You know, conference, you know, things like, you know, review, etc. So there's quite a lot of different activities and a lot of thoughts that we're going to start to put into that, all right? There's quite a bit to it. Right? It's going to come down to your activity though, but really understanding what your activity is about, and then start thinking about, have I got big activities or are they smaller activities? Booking a cleaner to come by is not the big macro activity, it's a smaller activity and probably gets caught up in something else. As I say, you're trying to break them down to those broad groups and specific tasks. Okay, don't put a specific task as sort of a broad group of things to do. Collect things up into big headlines, all right? So someone who makes all the phone calls, all right? So communications or conferencing or bookings. Get one person, bookings is a big headline task, and they will do all the bookings from all the different elements. If I need to think about my budget setting, make sure I put all the budgets together and come up with a master budget. Right, what we shouldn't have is little bits and pieces everywhere, but a few broad headings, and underneath that, all my different tasks. Okay, so macro, big picture, and then small. Once I've got all my bits and pieces together, I need to just lay everything out in a logical order. Okay, so I've got my task list from 1 to task number 10, 4, etc. and all that. So what I want to do is think about, what can be done at the same time, what needs to be done one thing after the other. Some things I can't do at the same time. Some things I need to make sure the first thing is prepared before I can move to the next. So, if we're looking at booking for the event, I want to book a park, and I want to book the cleaners, and I want to book the caterers, but I can't book all the cleaners and caterers until I know I definitely have the park. So there's a logical order. First one, call the council, try and book the place that I want to go to, because if that doesn't work out, none of the other things work. Okay, so that gives me a logical order straight away. So if this happens, then that happens. If this happens, then that happens. All right, now the next thing I need to do is set my responsibilities. So once I've agreed to the sequence, I need to say, well, who's actually going to be doing those activities in my work breakdown structure? And obviously I need to think about who's the most experienced, who's the most capable, and who's the most committed. Okay, so I need them experienced, I need them capable of doing the task, and I need them committed to doing the task. Because if they're experienced and capable but don't really care, they might not do it. If they're inexperienced and they're incapable but they're really, really keen, they still can't do it. So I need them to actually have the whole thing. If I manage to get all that right, my project should pretty much just work. Okay, I shouldn't have any problems at all. If I've got the right people in the right place doing the right jobs in the right order to achieve the correct tasks, okay, things are going to go pretty well. So just to recap, make sure I've got all my work breakdown structure. I've spoken to all my people. I've thought about the big ticket items. What are the key things that we need to do? I've broken those down into all the little sub-steps that happen one after the other in order to make it happen. I've made sure I've assigned the right person to the right job, who has the right skills and the right enthusiasm. I've thought about, what are my big ticket headings? What are the main themes I've got? What needs to happen when? So, my big park event is going to happen. And I've got everything in a logical order. Now I can start carrying out the tasks, all right? So that's that key part there. All right, excellent. Okay, so one of the tools that I'm going to start thinking about to make sure that I've got a good work breakdown structure is, I need to think about the sequence of activities, but also the sequencing of activities, okay? So if I'm thinking activity A, and then I want to go to activity B and activity C, I need to know that activity A is not just, a straight line. It might actually be, I plan, I implement, I review, I consolidate, okay? And that might actually take place a few times. I might not get it right the first go, so I might have to do that before I can then move to here, okay? I might have to go through a whole cycle, all those different things. So I need to think about what are all the different activities that are going to go into each one of those boxes, and then I can put, task A next to task B, next to task C, okay? And I need to think about what's the process under that, what's the process under that. Okay, that'll allow me to get a bit of an idea also of how long they're going to take, so what are the sub-steps, okay? How does it all fit together? And also what that'll allow me to do is work out, well, if they're planning, once they've implemented, is there a bit of time while they're reviewing that I might be able to move on to that? Or how do these tasks interrelate to each other? What can I do there? It'll also give me an idea of how long that takes as far as time. And then I know how long that one takes as far as time. And then I know how long that one's going to take as far as time. And then I can add this side plus that side together to come up with my time. all right, whatever it happens to be, okay? So I need to try and make my time estimates as accurate as possible, but in order to understand what each activity we're doing is, I need to make sure that I know exactly how long it's going to take and whether I can make any time savings. Okay, so laying them all down in one sort of diagram is going to become really important, making sure that we're really taking, probably the full picture and not just blowing past stuff. All right, so in order to understand this, make sure that you are reviewing similar project activities. So if you've done this in the past, you'll know how long that's going to take. You can start to seek stakeholder advice. You can simulate it. Okay, let's talk it through, rehearsals, that sort of stuff, or go give it a practice run, find out how long it actually takes, do the activity and time it, or seek expert advice, okay? So, getting a really good handle on how long things take is really important. A lot of things seem really simple on paper, but then when you break them down, you realize they're going to be a little bit more complicated than I thought, or it's going to take longer than I thought. All right, once again, people tend to be a little bit optimistic and think things are only going to take 5 minutes, and that's when they get stuck. If it does take 5 minutes, that's great. If you plan on taking a day and it only takes a couple of hours, fantastic. But it can also leave you really stuck. So think about how long it takes before you can move to the next logical step, Other tools that do that are things like Gantt Charts, and I'm not really going to go into those now, but take a look at the Gantt Chart. It's another great tool there. Okay, the Gantt Chart, okay, that's where you're going to overlay a bunch of processes against time, and that way you can start to think about where things fit, how long they're going to take, and at this stage, and lets you know when you can move on to your next stage and what things you can be doing concurrently. You can do critical path analysis, where you try and analyze the network diagram to work out, well, what are the conclusions into relationships there as well. Have a look through those, critical path. And that's where you're literally think about the start and finish times and starting to work out what relates to what. Okay, so you're just going through the diagram. So, if you go through the critical path, you start at the beginning, you get to the end, you work out how long everything takes. Once you've done that, you can work out, well, if everything works, we end up on time. But if there's any delays or problems with that, it's going to blow us out and blow our timings out. Once again, depending on your activity, the timing's probably not such a huge concern. But if your activity was a holiday with your family, you don't want to book the accommodation or have the accommodation booking 2 weeks after you already got home. Okay, so you need it at the right place at the right time. Okay, so these are things you can take a look at. There's some diagrams that we provide on there as well. Think about also the lead time. So before you can even begin the activity, is there a time that needs to go by? Your lead time, it could be anything. I need to order something from the supplier. Well, those suppliers aren't going to get here for at least 3 weeks, so you're not doing anything until they do. Little questions like that. All right. As I say, the key part here is regardless of what tool or methodology you use, make sure you've captured all your key tasks. Make sure you really understand within each task exactly what's going to happen. Make sure that you've made a reasonable estimation of how long that's going to take, and then actually make sure you place down all the tasks in some sort of sequence so you can clearly add up the time and get an accurate summation of what that's going to be. All right, otherwise you're going to end up in a position where your timings go out all over the place, so make sure you don't do that. All right, look, that's just a little bit of unsequencing. Detail, lay it out, put them clearly, speak to your stakeholders, get good estimations, and you should be okay. All right, a little bit now on budgeting. Now, obviously, we've spoken a lot about all the different resources we need. We've talked about sequencing and times and the reason all that was really important is because we need to pay for all of that stuff. All right, so what we need to come up with now is to understand, well, what's the budget? Okay, so now that we really understand exactly what's happening in this project and we've detailed all those things first, we can start to come up with, well, how much money is it going to cost us? What's it going to set us back? Now, there's two ways I can approach this. I can go bottom up. And when we're talking about budgeting bottom up, we're starting to look at adding up all the different items that we've got, okay? How much time, how much labor, all our resources, all that sort of stuff, and put all those together, and that pushes us up from a bottom up, and we end up with, here is our final dollar figure. We will require that much money. We've looked at all the tasks, we've looked at all the resources, we add it all up, and we go, that's what it's going to cost us. All right, so that's one way, that's the bottom up way. The other one is top down. Where we go, that's nice, we'd all like that for Christmas, but that's not really what we've got. here's your budget. I'm going to give you $1,000 or whatever it happens to be, and here is your expenditure. And I set, the figure. I say, look, this is the project I want to run. I'm prepared to give this much money towards it. Make it happen for that much or less. So bottom up, I go out and work out what the project is, add up all the costs and go, right, it's going to cost us this much, versus top down where they say, well, this is how much you've got to spend. Make it fit within that, fixed budget. All right, so, that's going to come from wherever. Now, when I'm doing my budget, I need to make sure that it includes everything that has to go into the budget. I need to think about, all my direct costs, my labor costs, my material costs, my hire costs, all those different costs. I need to think about capital costs. So if I need to buy any large items, I need to do that. You might need to buy vehicles, plant, equipment, machinery, large objects. Now, if you're going to do that, you need to make sure that if you're working for an organization, they will have policies about how that needs to occur. I know I've worked for places, they say, well, look, if you want to do that, it's under a certain amount. You need to go get 3 different quotes. And then, you're going to choose the cheapest quote or whatever it happens to be. They'll have some sort of rule, policy or guideline to make sure that you're acting appropriately. All right, so you've got to think about that, who you're working with. All right, just keep it in the back of your mind. I need to think about my overhead costs, my, what are the different overheads that I've got. I need to think about indirect costs. I need to think about the cost of my project team. And not just their hours, but also any other resources I might need to provide to them. All right, so, so if I'm thinking about the cost of labor, that work breakdown structure I got, that should give me a fairly good idea of the hours that are required. I should have also been able to then allocate the right person to it, and I know what their hourly rate is, etc. So the wage rates times the number of hours worked. I need to think about any other awards or agreements that are there, okay, and work out what my labor costs really are going to be. The other thing is they might have different allowances I need to factor in. So if I've got people working for a long time, I might need to think about overtime rates. If I'm only using people for a smaller amount of time, am I using casual employees that I don't have to pay until they begin work? How's that all going to factor in? So that work breakdown structure that we did before, that's really going to come in handy when working out what our real labor costs are. Other things I need to think about is on costs. So I need to think about for those employees, do I need to feed them? Do I need to give them superannuation? Do I need to give them leave provisions? Is there meal allowances? All that sort of stuff. And really, with the on costs for labour, 40% is really what I need to add on as an estimate for each employee. So if I think someone costs me $10 an hour that I'm directly paying them, there could be $4 an hour worth of additional costs I need to think about, equipment, insurance, whatever else it happens to be, okay? So there's quite a lot in there. Things like the overheads to the organisation, when I'm working out those costs, the overheads are things like, the rent, any hire costs, the cost of electricity, running water, the administration. There's all those sort of different costs there that, people forget. Cost of resources, I need to think about my materials. So, if I'm building something, it's, it's wood, it's bricks, it's, it's steel, it's all those raw components, and equipment. So machinery and tools, all those sort of things that need to come in from somewhere. Either I have them, or I might need to hire them, or I might need to purchase them, okay? But these are all costs that are going to come into it. Labor cost is a funny one, because often people don't include their own cost. They work out what everything else costs, and they know how much, that is, but then they forget to pay themselves. Right? Don't be that person. Make sure that you actually factor yourself in there as well, especially if you're looking at business, because, you can't rely on goodwill forever. You're going to have to pay someone eventually. So working out when and how, if you're doing it now, now's a good time, because if you don't end up spending it, awesome, then you save dollars. But if you don't factor it in and then you do end up spending it, it's going to blow your cost out, and that's not going to be so awesome because you go over cost. Other things to think about for costs are things like your insurance and your risk costs. Okay, so, you need to think about, well, what do I need to insure? If you've just gone out and bought a whole bunch of plant, equipment and machinery, you need to insure that to protect it. So if anything happens to it, you can get a replacement. The problem is obviously that then costs money to do. So, I need to think about what insurances I need. Things like public liability insurance. If I'm buying a vehicle, it might be comprehensive motor insurance as well as third-party protection. Okay, because there's a whole bunch of different things there that I need to think about. Obviously when I have employees, there's a whole bunch of different costs and insurances that need to cover them as well. Okay, also if I've identified risks to my organisation, so a risk to the plan, anything I did to try and offset that risk, I need to pay for as well. So all those risks probably cost me money. And as I say, there's quite a lot of things I might need to pay for. but I need to, once again, go through my work breakdown structure and my scope, my risk management plan to identify all those things I'm going to have to buy, when I'm going to need to purchase them, how much they're going to be, and that's going to have to get factored into my budget. All that labor cost, all those things, it all goes into the budget here, so we know exactly how much we're ready to spend. And once again, if we just work out what we need to do, add that all up, that's a bottom up. Alternative is we get told how much money we have to play with, and then we have to make everything fit within that budget, which is top down. All right, so think about your on cost, think about all that. It's all that hidden stuff. That's what really tends to bite people. People are really good at identifying the obvious stuff, but those little details, maybe not so much. All right, cool. So we'll talk about ways to get around that as well. Okay, so we've done quite a lot on budgets there, and we've tried to make sure that we're all good to go. So now is when you just do your final check. Make sure you get your team member consultation. Okay, once you've got that budget together, make sure you're doing your team consultation and the project sponsor if needs be. So your team members and the sponsor. Okay, so we want to get all these people together and make sure that everyone has an opportunity to now review all the information done so far. So your team members and your sponsor probably need to have a good look at the work breakdown structure. They probably need to look at all your task lists and all those sort of things. And they also need to have a good look at your budget. Because if you've made any mistakes, this is a great opportunity for other people with fresh eyes to come in and say, well, did you think about this? Did you think about this? And what if, what if, what if? Okay? Making sure that they're consulted prior to saying, yep, that's the fixed plan, and hearing them out. That's an important step to getting their commitment and creating team spirit for the project. So make sure you now, before you release your budget and say, yep, that's all fixed in stone, make sure you get those team members in and absolutely get their input. Speak to your project sponsor. This is what we're building, so they're getting a bit of an idea of what's coming up. Unlike Christmas, projects should not involve a lot of surprise. Okay, projects are all about making sure everyone knows what's going on and making sure that everyone's able to have full participation and full awareness and understanding of what's taking place. So remember, no surprises. We don't like surprises in project. That's risk bad. We're trying to avoid surprises and make sure this is all nice, easy and methodical. So bring those team members in, get them to have a look at your figures, get them to see if they can find any problems with it. Hey boss, what about? Hey boss, what about? Hey boss, what about? You really want that discussion taking place. And what you want to do is you make sure that when you go into the next phase of your project, all the team members feel they've been consulted, that they feel they've been listened to, they've had an opportunity to put their ideas in front of you, they've had their, their points considered, they're happy that the budget looked all right as well, because what you want is you want everyone on the same page. You don't want them going, oh, but we think this is wrong and they didn't listen to me, and because what will happen is it'll turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy. Things will go wrong and they'll go, yep, we tried to tell them, but they didn't listen. So make sure everyone's got a chance to have a say. Okay, get them in the room, show them all the work. Here's the work breakdown structure. Here's the budget. Here's everything I think should happen. Take another closer look. Yep, here was the brainstorm we did where I took all your ideas and I put them all into that chart. Okay, so really making sure everyone's had a chance to throw their eyes over the numbers, throw their eyes over the activities, and see if they can find any faults with it to help you out. Now remember, it's not criticism at you. What it is just eliminating one more chance that something can go wrong and to eliminate one more chance of something just being overlooked and then coming back to you at a critical time. Because projects, once you've got it all right, it should be a case of, yep, we put it in place and now we roll along, and anything that changes, we already anticipated, there was no surprises. We're pretty happy that we caught everything. If everyone gets a chance to be listened to, spoken to, have an input, they'll also back the project and they'll want to see it succeed. If you cut people out and just try and run it all by yourself and you just do all the planning in a bubble, people won't have the same buy-in, and when things get tough and things get hard, you'll find that they don't want to play anymore, and that's not going to go well for your project. So show good leadership, bring them in. If they find something wrong, remember it's not criticism, it's guidance, and hopefully, by this stage, if you've done all that right, you now have a good project plan. All right, excellent. Thank you very much.